From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana.
I know it may not look like it, but I've been around a while.
As Joe Biden stood in Congress, delivering what we now know was his last State of the Union address earlier this year, he imparted a bit of electoral wisdom from his years of fighting campaigns.
Those bragging about overturning Roe v. Wade have no clue about the power of women. But they found out when reproductive freedom was on the ballot. We won in 2022 and 2020, and we'll win again in 2024.
Was Joe Biden right? Could the overturning of Roe v. Wade, one of the most divisive moments in recent American history, decide the fate of the elections this year?
Women have been turning up to vote in huge numbers on the abortion issue. We saw that in the midterm elections, and at that point, it really struck me that women were determined to vote to uphold their reproductive rights and that they were going to be very dangerous to Republicans at the polls.
As Donald Trump and Kamala Harris prepare to slug it out in their very first televised debate tonight, the polls couldn't be closer. In this election, will it be women who cast the deciding vote? The story today: the battle of the sexes dividing the US election.
I'm Sarah Baxter. I'm director of the Marie Colvin Centre for International Reporting, former deputy editor of the Sunday Times, and a columnist for The Standard.
Well, Sarah, just describe how significant is the gender gap between Trump and Harris voters?
It's huge. There's always been a bit of a gender gap between Republicans and Democrats, with men favouring Republicans, women favouring Democrats. But now it's become a total gulf. So it looks like all men of all ages, including young men, favour Trump by at least 10 points. But young women favour Harris by 38 points over Trump. That's a fantastically large gender gap. And that's really going to play out at the polls. Every sector of women support Harris. But the numbers among the young, who under Biden were not that bothered about voting, is huge. And the other thing that we're seeing is women registering to vote in larger numbers than men. Come the autumn, come August, now we're into September, people start registering to vote for the elections if they're not already on the electoral rolls. And where the figures are available, they're not available in every state, but in swing states like Michigan, where they are available, it looks like women are registering to vote in far greater numbers than men. And that's also a big warning flag to Republicans about the power of the women's vote.
And Sarah, they will be debating tonight. This is the first time we'll see Trump and Harris taking each other on directly. How much will the sexes of the candidates affect, the theatre of the event? We know that the Trump side, for example, are very worried about his mic being on when he's not supposed to be talking.
Yes, I think his own campaign aides are afraid that he'll make some kind of vicious attack on Harris that will further alienate women voters, that he will sound sexist and rude and aggressive, as he tried to do with Hillary Clinton as well. I don't know if you remember, but he was sort of stalking her like a silverback gorilla on stage.
It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Yeah, because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
And
very weird.
Yeah, that was the word that Kamala Harris herself used about that debate. Asked a few years ago about how she would have reacted if Trump had tried that on her, she said, "I would have said, 'Why are you being so weird?'" She wants the microphones to be unmuted so that we see Donald Trump unfiltered and unleashed in all his sexism against a woman. His aides want to constrain Trump, keep him on message, keep him focused on things like the economy where he has an advantage, while Harris would like to bait and goad him into offending women.
Sarah, for a lot of this election campaign, it feels like the Republicans would really like Donald Trump to be focusing on the economy, on inflation. Those are the issues where they think they might be able to drive home an advantage. But the issue that keeps coming up, where they aren't doing so well, is abortion. How much do you think it could shape the result of this election?
I think it could have a huge impact. It's certainly one of the biggest known unknowns about the impact. It's that how many women are going to come and vote on this issue. What we do know from polling, there was a recent survey from the University of Maryland, which showed that 93% of Democrats and 70% or more of Republicans in favour of decriminalising most abortions. And if that translates into voting patterns, that's going to have a huge impact. One of the things about young women in particular is that abortion has overtaken the economy as the most important issue, driving them to vote. So we're really talking about a 50-50 divided nation in America, where the result is going to depend on turnout, who can maximize turnout. Now, it always used to be Donald Trump, certainly in 2016, and even in 2020, when he outperformed his polling position, he was always very good at getting what you might call low propensity voters to get out of bed and bother to go to the polls and support him. But what if women are going to vote in huge numbers for Harris? That might not be fully reflected in the polling because we've seen them outperform the polls in special elections on the abortion issue specifically and in the midterm elections. And there was also a study by the Brookings Institution which showed that women vote far more consistently than men by about 52% to 48%. And there are slightly more women than men in America, a tad over 50%. So if women vote in big numbers for Harris, even if men vote in big numbers for Trump, women are more high propensity voters, more likely to turn out, and there are more of them anyway.
That could really be a deciding factor.
Yes.
Sarah, take us back, because there are a number of reasons why women seem to favour Harris over Trump. A lot of this goes all the way back to the first time he stood for election, the election he won, when a video was released showing him talking, they called it locker room chat, but talking about how he views women. Just talk us through the impact that had.
Audio tape emerged of Trump talking very disrespectfully about how he treats women and, dare I say, their private parts. Now, women were shocked by this. He still won the election. He still beat Hillary Clinton. This goes back to 2016. But at the same time, when Trump was elected, there was this feeling among women that they hadn't done enough to stop him being elected and that now their reproductive rights might be threatened. And if you remember, almost immediately after Trump's inauguration, there was a huge pussy march. Ooh, can I say that? There was a huge march by women wearing pink, so-called pussy hats. And over a million women marched in Washington to defend their rights.
My body, my choice! My body, my choice! My body, my choice!
It really was a big moment, that Million Women March. And, many people would argue that Me Too wouldn't have become such a moment if Donald Trump hadn't ended up in the White House and if there wasn't so much residual anger amongst women. Very quickly, he followed it up with action in the appointments he made to the Supreme Court. Just talk us through that and the impact it had.
Yes, so Donald Trump had an amazing run of luck. It's quite rare for a president to get the chance to elect more than one Supreme Court judge. Donald Trump appointed 3 Supreme Court judges. That's astonishing, and it completely changed the composition of the Supreme Court towards the right and towards the pro-life movement. And it's one of the reasons why he's so revered by his supporters in the evangelical churches. Now, of course, Donald Trump then was like the dog that caught the car, because he's now getting the backlash from the other side, from women who don't want their reproductive rights ruled over by the Supreme Court, which sent it back to the states.
And this Trump-backed Supreme Court that overturned Roe versus Wade, just explain how that has played out, what the impact is.
Almost immediately, it had a tremendous impact on limiting women's reproductive freedoms. So what happened is that the Supreme Court ruled that abortion should be decided locally, state by state. So if you live in New York, Massachusetts, California, nothing's changed. If you live in Alabama, Georgia, even Florida, a lot has changed. And women now find it very difficult to get an abortion in some states after 6 weeks of pregnancy. And frankly, a lot of women don't even know they're pregnant at 6 weeks. And Kamala Harris has been really using that, and rightly so. I think she feels genuinely indignant about it and furious. And at the Democratic convention, 3 women stood on stage and recounted their own testimonies about what that meant for them. For one of the women, for example, from Texas, it meant that she couldn't get an abortion in her home state, even though her baby could not possibly live and it was threatening her own life, that doctors were more willing to risk her death for an unviable pregnancy than carry out a procedure which could result in them being convicted. So that was drastic. But then there was another speaker who really shocked the convention a lot.
Growing up, I was an all-American girl. Varsity soccer captain, cheerleading captain, homecoming queen, and survivor.
She was from Kentucky, and she stood up. She's a very young woman. She was about 21, 22, and she stood up and she said,
At age 12, I took my first pregnancy test, and it was positive.
She was raped at 12 and by her stepfather. And she would have been forced to carry that baby in the state of Kentucky. Was this what women wanted?
That was the first time I was ever told, you have options. I can't imagine not having a choice.
And she helped the governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear, win election in 22 as the governor of a red state like Kentucky, very Bible Belt, even though he's a Democrat. And that was proof of the power of women's voting rights.
And that power was exercised quite quickly after the overturning of Roe versus Wade at the midterms.
Well, it was one of the reasons why the pollsters got the results of the midterm elections so wrong. Republicans were very cocky about the fact that Biden was unpopular. We're coming through a period of very high inflation in America. People were furious about the COVID lockdowns for one reason or another. There was a lot of anger. And Republicans thought that they were going to win the House and the Senate by comfortable margins. In the end, they did win the House narrowly, but the Democrats kept control of the Senate. And it meant that there was a limit to what Republicans could do against Joe Biden and his presidential powers. And that was entirely because women turned up in huge numbers to vote. And I think they have been energized and mobilized by the abortion issue.
And that seemed to be the moment when Joe Biden realized that abortion could be a campaign issue which would really influence the next election.
I think that was a key moment when Joe Biden said in his State of the Union address that people have no clue about the power of women in America on this issue. That was a really sort of drop the mic moment, because Republicans sitting and listening to him felt that tremor of fear that there might be an earthquake in the women's vote.
If you, the American people, send me a Congress that supports the right to choose, I promise you, I'll restore Roe v. Wade as the law of the land again.
It's one of the reasons why he delegated that issue to Kamala Harris, which she was thrilled. I mean, she volunteered for the role. And under the radar, while people were saying, what's the vice president doing? Why is Kamala Harris so ineffective? And, putting her down, actually, she was quietly touring the country, addressing groups of young people, groups of women, students, etc., on abortion rights, and really energizing that sector of the population. So when she did emerge suddenly as the new candidate, the replacement for Joe Biden, one who's very comfortable, not only because of her sex as a woman, but also because of her strong views on reproductive rights, she was confident on the issue. She sounded strong on the issue. She was battle-tested on the issue.
Coming up, how worried is Donald Trump about losing female votes? And will his testosterone-charged rallies and podcasts with tech bros attract enough men to make up for it? That's in a moment. So, Sarah, you've been describing this widening gender gap between the way voters are looking at the next election in America and how Kamala Harris has been able to speak very successfully to women, even before she became the candidate, on the issue of abortion as a wedge issue. A few weeks ago, we saw her at the Democratic National Convention. She stepped onto the stage. There was a crowd in front of her, a sea of white. Just explain what was happening.
So women turned up to Kamala Harris's convention speech wearing white jackets and any white they could get their hands on to signal how proud they were that a woman was running for president and could be the first woman president of the United States, because white was the color in America of women's suffrage. And it was only just over a century ago, in 1920, that women got the vote in America. So this is a historic moment. And I think if she does become president, still a big if, it's going to be an incredible moment in history for America. But she is not the person saying that. She wants people to vote for her policies, for her strength of character, for whatever, anything but the fact that she is potentially a historic first female president. But she's very happy for women to say that and to feel excited about it. So in a way, the white jackets were doing the talking for her.
And you really got a sense of who a Harris voter is. The women in white, some of the celebrities who seem to be endorsing her. Give us a sense of who is Harris woman.
Harris woman is a lot more young and fun, I think, than the Hillary supporters, and certainly a lot younger and more fun than the Trump supporters. Charlie XCX, a British singer of all people, kind of launched the mood with the Kamala is brat. That meme that took off, the lime green, have fun this summer, support Kamala Harris.
And we all had to work out what it meant.
Yeah, I definitely had to do a little Googling myself, but I'm not the demographic that she was trying to reach. It really worked. The other thing that I thought was tremendous was Kamala Harris's campaign song, which suggests to me that she'd been thinking about this for a long time, just in case Joe Biden happened to fall under the bus, because she launched herself immediately with a campaign ad to the sound of Beyoncé's song, Freedom. And that was a very powerful statement.
We choose freedom.
Freedom, freedom, I can't move.
This idea of freedom, cut me loose.
Freedom, freedom, where are you? 'Cause I need freedom too.
The freedom not just to get by, but get ahead.
That had a kind of gospel feel to it. And it's a very powerful campaign song. And immediately the message had changed from one where weary Democratic supporters had to vote for Joe Biden, aged 81, in order to save democracy, into one of excitement about voting for freedom, personified by Kamala Harris. But the subtext to all that freedom also meant freedom for women to decide what to do with their own bodies.
There was a very different vibe at a lot of the Trump rallies and at the Republican National Conference. Just describe what it's like and sort of the more masculine vibe.
Well, if you look at who Trump had on as his stars at the Republican convention, the one thinks of most is Hulk Hogan, the wrestling star, who stripped off his shirt to reveal his huge biceps, even at age 70, with the message that he was voting for Trump.
I've seen some great tag teams in my time. Hulk Hogan and, ooh, yeah, the Macho Man Randy Savage. But you know something? I see the greatest tag team of my life standing upon us, getting ready to straighten this country out for all the real Americans.
They also had the country star Kid Rock. Kamala Harris had John Legend and Stevie Wonder, go figure. So I think the Trump campaign has been very testosterone-fueled. I think one of the surprises, even to Donald Trump, is how much of a bro his running mate, J.D. Vance, has turned out to be. All those comments that have been resurfaced, all the insults about childless cat ladies, which seem almost specifically aimed at people like Taylor Swift. The way that Vance has been talking about women who are childless not having a proper stake in the future of the country. And I think Donald Trump hadn't quite realised when he picked J.D. Vance how toxic some of his comments were that have been unearthed about women. And frankly, he goes on repeating them. He's not apologising for them. So Vance is a big negative. Well, who picked Vance? To some extent, Donald Trump was influenced by Don Jr., his super testosterone hunting and shooting and swaggering son. I definitely feel that Trump is missing the presence of Ivanka, his daughter, in this campaign. Melania, as usual, is nowhere to be seen either. He seems to have been running a campaign that has unleashed his worst macho tendencies, shall we say. I think Trump supporters run these ridiculous images, posters, flags of him, all these memes of him looking like Rambo with, huge biceps and holding a rifle, holding a machine gun. But Trump is trying to drive up the male vote now. And he knows he's lost women. So he's trying to reach out to the biggest male audiences that he can in this world of podcasting and social media and try and persuade young men who don't normally bother to vote in huge numbers to get out and vote for him. Of course, the biggest male influencer in the world really is Elon Musk, who's turned into a huge Trump supporter. Silicon Valley is now favouring Trump. Vance is also part of that world. And this is a very, very masculine bro world.
It is a risk for Donald Trump. It does feel like he's leaning into his reputation with women and just trying to appeal to sort of a frat boy, tech bro humour and hope that he will incentivize so many young men who wouldn't otherwise vote that it'll make up for losing women. Is he having second thoughts, though? Because it does feel like he's slightly U-turning on some of this. He's trying desperately to try and appeal to women, despite the vibe at his rallies.
Abortion is the biggest issue that he's been flip-flopping on. So one of the things that's happening in November is that specific abortion measures are on the ballot in a number of states, in about 10 states. 2 of them are very important swing states, Arizona and Nevada. And one of them, now thought to be a surefire Republican state, but where women seem very motivated to vote, is Florida. And abortion is on the ballot in Florida. And he was asked whether he supported the abortion law in Florida, which stops women receiving an abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy. And he said he thought that was too early and said he didn't support Florida's abortion law.
The state that you are a resident of, There's an abortion-related amendment on the ballot to overturn the 6-week ban in Florida. How are you going to vote on that?
Well, I think the 6 week is too short. It has to be more time, and so and I've told them that I want more weeks.
So you'll vote in favor of the amendment?
I am going to be voting that we need more than 6 weeks.
So this was then taken as proof that he was therefore going to vote in favor of abortion rights in Florida on November 5th, same day as the presidential election. And his campaign let that impression surface that actually he was going to be pro-abortion in the Florida ballot. Remember, Mar-a-Lago is in Florida. Donald Trump is a Florida resident. So this question is pertinent for him. But the backlash from the pro-life movement, which is huge in the Republican Party and huge among his own fans, it was enormous. Within 24 hours, he backpedaled and said he was going to vote to restrict women's rights to an abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy. So this really hasn't helped him. I'd be very surprised if Kamala Harris doesn't raise this in the debate.
He also seems to be trying to appeal to women now by talking about IVF.
He's even gone so far as to say, I'm going to make sure that women can have IVF funded by Medicare and by their insurance policies. But actually, women don't believe that either, because not long ago, Republicans had the chance to vote to increase provision for IVF in Congress and voted against it. So again, if he starts to say this, Kamala Harris will be able to counter and say, look at what the states are actually doing, not at what you're saying. Look at what Republicans have actually voted in Congress, not at what you're pretending to believe in a bid to repair the damage you have caused among women voters.
This election seems very, very close. So much comes down to people who don't often come out to vote, coming out to vote on the day. For you, as a woman living in America, how does this election feel, knowing what's on the line?
I spend a lot of time in Pennsylvania, and in 2020, my neighborhood was plastered with Trump signs. That's not the case anymore. So I feel some of that energy has gone out of the Trump campaign, and that the excitement and energy is with the Harris campaign. But let's not forget, she's barely been a candidate for a month or more. And this is a short election, not by British standards, but definitely by American standards, and things can turn on a dime in a moment. We'll see how she performs in debate against Trump. I think she might do well. But if she doesn't, she could lose a lot of support overnight.
Anything might happen.
Yeah, I'm sorry to be that vague, but it's true.
That was Sarah Baxter, former deputy editor of the Sunday Times, who's based in the US. And for more of our American election coverage, head to thetimes.com, where you'll find a deep dive on this subject, on the gender divide in this election, by our man in Washington, Hugh Tomlinson, under the headline, Why Trump is Suddenly Talking About Cocaine. Here's a clue, it's all about young male voters. And if you're looking for more podcasts on the election, then look no further. Have a listen to our episode from last week on why so many tech bros like Elon Musk are supporting Donald Trump.
These individuals, they now have a lot to lose. They are the establishment. In Trump, they see someone with whom they can do business.
We'll put a link to it in the description of this episode. And if you can, please do leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts, or just rate us. This episode was produced by Priyanka Deladia. The executive producers were Kate Ford and Fiona Leach. Sound design and theme composition were by Mal Lassetto. Thanks so much for listening. See you tomorrow.